Before we start, just a little message to let you know that this podcast contains a couple of swear words. If it's likely to offend, the next podcast is also amazing and swear word free. Hello and welcome to the Rewilding the Artist podcast, focusing on a culture of care in the arts, a place of inspiration, supporting you to bring a culture of care into your environment, whether you're a freelance practitioner or arts organisation. I am your host, visual artist and changemaker, Gaia Redgrave. Today, I'd like to welcome Nick Cherryman, also known as nationally recognised drag performer and live artist Ibi Profane. They are an award-winning teacher, social activist, and academic. They have lectured around the country and are contacted regularly to speak to organisations, media, and educational groups on topics as broad as drag performance, how we understand queerness, LGBTQ rights, and gender, sexuality, and culture. They have worked in the intersection of advocacy, activism, and education for over 7 years, and their favourite thing to do is curl up with a book and a cup of coffee in local cafes. They can be found on Instagram at Ibi Profane. Welcome, Nick or Ibi. What would you prefer me to call you?
I don't care as long as you call me. That's the priority. No, you can call me either. I go by both. What an absolutely lovely introduction that I absolutely had no part in writing. That's so very kind to have that. It's so, yeah, thank you so much for that.
It was a very good, very well-written introduction. And I was very grateful for it.
Oh, what? Yeah. The gift of giving, isn't it?
Absolutely. Well, thank you for being here. It's really nice to see you again. It's always lovely to chat with you. We always have a great time having a chat together, don't we?
Absolutely.
I wanted to invite you to one of the Rewilding Culture of Care podcasts, because it was you that brought to my attention the concept of a good faith agreement. So I've been really looking forward to speaking to you further about that. I was bowled over when I heard about it, and so I'm really pleased that you're here to talk about it. I'm very grateful that you were happy for me to include it in the Rewilding Nestbox resource. Can you tell me a little bit more about how it originated and the reasons for its use at all?
Absolutely. First of all, I'll kind of clarify what it is as well. I think it's kind of, when I explain what it is, it explains kind of a bit of why I've come about with it. So the Good Faith Agreement is something that I put together originally when I was working with a queer educational group that I founded and ran for a few years. So the group was called Queer Disrupt. You can still find it on YouTube, queer/disrupt. And we did conferences, we did outreach stuff, and we actually ended up with thousands of people following us around the world. And it came about partially because of that. And the idea of the group was to kind of talk about queer topics and queer themes and queer identity to a broad audience. The accessibility was our key aim, basically. Now, when you bring people together, we were doing it over the pandemic as well, so a lot of it was online. When you bring people together from the broadest different backgrounds and cultures and demographics that you could possibly imagine, and we really were getting everyone. Like, I think at one point we managed to get one of our events, we managed to get someone from all 6 continents with the
Wow.
exception of Antarctica. Like, it was that kind of broad.
I'll let you off with Antarctica.
Well, we were going to reach out to a poll station and be like, "One of you just want to tune in just so we can say." Anyway. The idea of this was then like, how do we conduct complicated conversations in a space where people are coming at it from such wildly different backgrounds, even if they share an interest? And so the idea came about of this kind of what we kind of colloquially labeled at the time the good faith agreement, that actually I've just run with it. And the good faith agreement is, to kind of summarize kind of in its most basic form, is the idea that we let people make mistakes. And that is, if someone says something and perhaps you're a bit like, ooh, okay, or says something that you're kind of unclear on, or it could be read in kind of a multiple different ways, or yeah, overall you're not entirely clear about what was meant. Particularly as well, this comes about with linguistic and language differences, which is also why it was particularly important for us. We assume that what has been said in good faith under, in these circumstances, the guise of learning, of education, of community building, and so on, unless we have a specific reason to think otherwise. So if, for example, someone says something and you take it in good faith and like, oh, actually, just so you're aware, we're going to try and avoid that kind of term, and they continue using it, we can then make an assumption, for example, they're now using it in bad faith because they've had the opportunity and the slack. So it's not a forgive all carte blanche on things. So when I use it in teaching, for example, at my university, I teach what we call active bystander intervention. It's how do you kind of safely engage with and productively change kind of cultural norms and in kind of harmful behaviors. I say in my classroom, and I almost have it word for word, I can just say exactly what I say here, which is the good faith agreement is the assumption that if someone says something that is perhaps problematic or a little bit kind of like, oh, I need to be careful about that, we assume it's meant in good faith in the agreement, that it is there to learn and have conversation unless we have a specific reason to assume otherwise. And the examples I use every single time is if, for example, someone uses some sort of slur or racial slur in my classroom, you are out of my classroom. And believe me, I'll be following it up outside the classroom as well, because I say there is no good faith reason for someone to use, say, a particular slur in my classroom. There is no good faith reading of that. However, I am non-binary, I use they, them pronouns, but I'm acutely aware that 99.9% of people read me as a gay man. So if someone accidentally calls me he, him, unless I think they're doing it specifically to annoy me, I take it in good faith. That doesn't mean I don't correct. It doesn't mean I don't go, oh, actually, I prefer they, them. But it does mean that it gives them that, oh, right, okay. And it gives people the opportunity to change behaviors without shutting down the space of conversation, which ultimately, at least for me in these sorts of spaces, community building and conversation is at the heart of what we do. So it's a kind of a, for want of a better phrase, a fluid contextual based template that allows a level of control, allows for learning and control of learning spaces in what I hope is a productive and useful way.
Yeah, and sharing. If we can't learn from each other and we can't understand each other if we can't share these things. If people are scared to ask questions, for example, because they're unsure whether their language might be seen as correct or incorrect or offensive or not, if we don't ask these questions, how can we learn? How can we know about people? It's taken me time to get used to differences in pronouns. It has. It's been a learning curve for me. I must say it's been a very interesting learning curve for me, where I've asked for information and I've also gone and researched things. I have now learned that I'm now fairly confident with they, them, and with yourself. However, for the purpose of this podcast, I am showing this to the camera. We have the use of a learning tool called a post-it note.
Great. With the post-it note, just for clarity, says in big, bold, capital letters, they, them. Clearly to remind Gaia that, that's the pronouns I use.
Absolutely.
But
Absolutely.
I think to kind of, I think that actually is a really useful example of this in practice, right? Because there, the conversations that we've had in the past, like with friends, we speak before. Is I mean, this isn't the first time we've met. It's not even the second, third, fourth, or fifth time. You know, we've done a lot of conversations.
We've known each
Um,
other for a while, haven't we?
Yeah. And actually, in that time frame, I shifted to they them pronouns, I believe. Like, I think you
Yes.
originally knew me as he him. So I'm also acutely aware of people who have kind of learned and kind of in their mind stabilized a particular person, and then all of a sudden I'm like, actually, it's a little bit different from that, and the things that come with that. Like, I get all of that. But if I was to use this, yeah, as an example, if I was unable to take your attempts in good faith, your attempts to make me feel comfortable, which I am deeply grateful for. I appreciate you making the effort, and anyone who makes the effort in these sorts of ways. Um, if I'm not prepared to give that space for people to learn and adapt if they choose to, we wouldn't be having this conversation right now. You know what I
Mm,
mean?
mm.
And this is perhaps a very simple, very easy, I would say, way. Pronoun shifting is not a big adjustment for a lot of people, even if it does take time. He's not asking you to kind of, shake the world and flip your world upside down. But I think one of the things I really like about the good faith agreement is that it is applicable outside of the classroom in kind of day-to-day life, but also on both kind of the micro and the macro scale. Like, this is an example of it on a very micro interpersonal level. But again, I've also spoken about how I used it for a organization which had literally thousands of people following us. Like,
Absolutely.
it's translatable, and there's an element of it not being so solidly fixed in stone that it is adaptable to context, which we were very keen to do. Because the second we say this is what you can and this is what you can't do, even with our own biases and our own understandings of situations, without meaning to, we isolate conversation,
Mm.
and we isolate what we believe, and we kind of reify and set in stone what we believe is correct or not, without having the space to have those conversations and flexibility and fluidity between that. And it allowed us to also learn ourselves. We had, for example, you can imagine the kind of background and beliefs we had as a queer educational group, right? I mean, I think we whether I like to say or not, we fall within a particular stereotype of political and social views. And fine, cool, I own it. I'm not going to pretend otherwise. But to say, for example, that this is what we should do also puts me in a position where I'm claiming an authority over how other people understand knowledge and knowledge learning. And I just actually wasn't prepared to engage with that
Mm.
in that kind of format. So this philosophy, I think, probably a better way, is actually how I now go forward through my life. Um, it's not perfect there, and I'm sure people listening will be, well, what about this thing? And yeah, I agree, there will be what about moments. But I think as a general rule of thumb, it's done nothing but kind of help encourage or open up conversation, or at least grant a space for growth and productive and constructive conversation, much more than perhaps other ways that I was doing it, at least before. Yeah, one of the things I will say though, just to clarify, it does take a particular person, a particular type of person who's prepared to engage in this way. And I think that what I wouldn't say, and I'd be very keen to state, is I would never expect everyone to necessarily engage with this. There are some spaces where some people would say, actually, this is what we're doing. And I respect that. So I very much take, particularly in my classrooms, this idea of this is the kind of the philosophy we're moving forward with. And if you're not comfortable with that, that is fine. There is genuinely no hard feelings. I'm fortunate enough in the course that I teach, there are other teachers. So I'm gonna be like, I would encourage you to reach out to them, and they'll probably have different methods moving forward. But this is how I'm running my classroom. This is how I'm running this space. It is a way that I feel comfortable with, and I've not had any complaints yet. After engaging in the class and in this specific framework and in education for 7, 8 years now. So until I have a reason otherwise, I'm sticking with it. It's there we are.
Well, I was going to ask, because that's a good leading to what I was going to ask next is, has there been any times where you found difficulties in using this philosophy, either within the institution that you work for or in a different capacity. I know that you're a performer as well. So has it proved problematic at any time, or any difficulties with using it?
From my side of things, generally no, actually. To be
Brilliant.
completely honest, it has actually helped save certain situations from going into full chaos. A particular example I can give of this was
Absolutely. I'd love to hear about an example.
yeah, where it went one way, and actually I was able to go, whoa, no, we all agreed on this, calm down. And I was teaching a class, and it was we were talking about consent basically in it, and the idea of consent and responsibility versus vulnerability, and actually how, for example, just because someone is vulnerable doesn't necessarily mean they're in any way, shape, or form responsible if some sort of action takes place against them. In this particular case, we were talking about sexual assault. And someone in the class said, like, to quote them, they said, "Oh, a few years back, my friend was assaulted on a walk home, and I remember thinking, what if she wasn't wearing that skirt? She wouldn't have." And it was very much almost like from the textbook kind of example of like what not to say, right? And what not to think.
Absolutely.
And the classroom, primarily women, exploded.
I can imagine.
Yeah, and I can as well. And well, I don't need to. I was there. I'm not surprised. Is what I mean to say. Like, it absolutely kicked off. And actually, what it allowed me to do was go like, "Whoa! Everyone, slow down. Stop. 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 No one is saying what was said is not problematic, but we have two options here." And actually, what we ended up doing is we took a 5-minute break. Everyone got the chance to stretch their legs, calm down. We came back and it's like, right, we have this good faith agreement. Let's have a conversation about this. Okay? This is a young man who, frankly, said something, and he was not dumb. He kind of knew it would get a response, but I don't think he was doing it to get a response. I think he was doing it to be quite honest, with actually like, well, this is the kind of the view that I had, and like, help me otherwise. And actually, we had an extended conversation about it. We listened to each other. He listened to different people. At the end of the class, he literally said to the class, he went, "You know what? I fucked up, and you're right." Now, if I'd let that explode and people had stormed out, there would be no productive growth there. And actually, he's a friend of mine now. Like, and actually, he give credit where credit is due. He does a lot of things, and he goes out of his way to educate himself. And I mean, I wouldn't have time with him otherwise, frankly.
No.
But he was like, yeah, shit. Yeah, that was a messed up thing to think. And the fact that it facilitated me being able to go, whoa, hang on, we all agreed to this situation when we walked in here, and we all knew the conversation was going to be potentially sensitive. We all knew what we were getting in for. Let's stick by that, even if it's hard. And actually, yeah, we have now someone who's walked out of that situation and gone, damn, yeah, I needed to learn. And it allowed him to learn. How is that? In my mind, at least, using this as an example, my question would be for if anyone was listening in a bit. I was like, out of all possible outcomes, that's the best one that I could envisage from that situation once it erupted.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It allowed that space for that learning, but it also takes, like you said earlier, a certain someone to be able to work with this concept and to be able to manage that kind of situation as well.
It can be quite emotionally laborious and quite kind of mentally draining at times when you get to some really heavy conversations and people say things, and sometimes you can be a bit like, "Whew, that's a lot." So again, it does require a certain resilience. So I also get why, but also there's a resilience there as well where I think, again, I'd like to stress this. This doesn't come without boundaries. Like, if you were to ask a question, let's say about my gender and pronouns and so on, with you right now, for example, I'd be very happy to discuss that. But also, part of the good faith agreement would be if I say to you, actually, you know what, I don't have that capacity right now, it's you take that in good faith as well.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
it's a genuine thing. It's not just me going, "Oh, piss off, I don't want to have this conversation. It's me going, actually, right now, I can't, or I don't want to. I don't even need to give a reason. No. And that is also part of that good faith.
It's
And
a two-way thing.
absolutely. And because what I don't want people to feel like is like, well, I'm being forced into these situations where I have to listen to people that I don't like saying these awful things, and then I'm expected to do the work. And no, well within your rights to go, actually, you know what? But it does mean that you can take a step back in a way which, if not constructive, at least isn't actively destructive or shutting down of conversations.
And allows for that breathing space as well, if a breathing space is needed.
Absolutely, absolutely. And sometimes that's, at least for me, really important. People process, understand, conceptualize, think through complicated topics and not complicated topics in very wildly different ways. I speak as someone who is, neurodivergent, who has had to learn, actually, sometimes there are these things that I process in a different way to other people. And sometimes people have said things and be like, I don't understand how that could be taken in a way which is good faith, but I'm going to check. Like, could you clarify what I mean? Like, what you mean, sorry, when you say this to me. I'm like, right, I hadn't understood it in that way. That makes more sense. So again, I take it on the assumption of good faith, particularly from friends who, even if I don't understand what they've said or why they've said it, I have no reason to think they would be saying something deliberately like nasty. And actually, sometimes I've gone, oh, yeah, I completely misread that. I got the wrong end of the stick there. But it prevented that kind of falling out.
Yeah, absolutely. I understand the misreading, the misunderstanding thing of neurodivergency. Yeah.
It's again, I find it a really kind of useful way just to facilitate. It's a stable but kind of flexible enough framework that it's very adaptable while still maintaining a level of kind of individual autonomy and agency over wherever individuals, but also where it's kind of applied and how. So I think I lucked out quite early on in finding that good balance, because I think it could have gone either way had I not been, I guess, in a certain way, forced to come up with this concept, right, to facilitate conversations across, such a broad range of people.
When we were speaking a couple of weeks ago, you mentioned to me, you used the phrase, I'm not prepared to engage unless we have this kind of framework. And I thought that there and then, I thought, wow, that comes from a really empowered position. I really admired that empowered position.
Thank you.
Yeah, it was fantastic. Do you feel empowered by it?
Absolutely, yes. Absolutely. Not only in terms of I know I'm helping create a space where I can learn, but it also allows me the space to make mistakes as well. Um, and learn myself from other people, as well as, if people are wanting to, learn from me. I think it's a, how can I frame it? It's a tool I wish I had earlier on in life. And I appreciate it may not be a tool for everyone. But for me, I found it, for the most part, nothing but generative and nice and useful and beneficial and everything else, all the good stuff. And part of that is feeling empowered. Again, to stress, part of that of this empowerment is the the ability to, within this framework, draw boundaries and go, well, hang on a minute, no, I'm allowed to draw a boundary, and actually, I can go, you need to take it in good faith that I'm being genuine here, and going, for whatever reason, I can't do X, Y, or Z. As well as, when appropriate, clearly demarcate my boundaries. So, for example, to use the classroom example, if someone was to drop, say, the N word or something in my classroom, I'd be like, you need to leave now. Like, I was very clear on my boundary. I don't believe there's a good faith reading of this here. For example, there were very few circumstances I could ever imagine needing to use that word, ever, as a necessity. Like, virtually non-existent. So why you're using it? So that would be an example of that. So both, is it for my comfort and the safety of other people? It comes with being able to draw those boundaries, and it facilitates that as well to a level that I'm comfortable with. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. It does make sense. And I'm sitting here thinking different ways that it could be used as well. There's often when, well, I've experienced this myself. I've mentored a number of people who have experienced this, where whether you're disabled or neurodivergent, you relay your access needs in an environment, in a work environment, and then sometimes these are not met, and sometimes they are not met because there is a lack of belief or a lack of understanding of how important these things are. It's a sort of, oh, it's just that, it won't be a problem, or, well, it doesn't affect me, it's only something little, it won't be a problem. So I've just been working with some wonderful artists, part of Utopia's Bach, who did the first podcast. So Lindsay and Lisa, if you've listened to the first podcast, so if not, go and listen to the first one about Utopia's Bach. We've just been putting together a creative access process called the Park, or Park. um, about this kind of thing. So, for example, when I struggle with sound in the background, so if I'm in a meeting or in an event and there's notifications going off, it can be a massive trigger for me and put me into a situation which is very, very difficult because I experience complex PTSD. And the same with other things, like if somebody needs captions, it's beneficial for people who are delivering to then speak more slowly. But sometimes these things don't happen because the difference is not understood.
Just because sometimes as well.
Absolutely, yeah.
And
So I'm
that doesn't mean it's
thinking,
okay, just to clarify. That doesn't mean it's okay. But
no, no,
sometimes
no, no.
things get missed, and sometimes people are, I think I'm assuming you're going to say people can genuinely be trying their best and still not quite get there.
Absolutely, I agree. That sometimes, yes, understand there's mistakes, totally get that. That's fine. But a meeting in the middle and saying, actually, this is difficult for me, this is an access requirement, and then things can change. Sometimes it's continuous. And when it's continuous, I'm then thinking of, will the in good faith agreement actually help with that kind of understanding? If that was mentioned beforehand in relation to access requirements, might that work?
I think that would actually be quite a useful example. I think because it would also allow you, I think, a level of agency and a level of control where you feel like you would be able to step out of it. Like if it's a continuous sort of disregard, right, for certain things, despite the conversation, there comes a point where I think you'd be fair to say, actually, I'm no longer prepared to engage with this with good faith. And that can be your own boundary. You can be like, when I no longer want to engage with good faith with something, for whatever reason, that, at least for me, has I found empowering because it's very much a kind of a guideline for when I go, actually, I want to back off. But it also helps me kind of conceptualize a situation like, is this malice or is this perhaps ignorance? Well meaning, but ignorance, you know what I mean? And that's not to dismiss the effect of that at all. At
Absolutely, yeah.
all. And I'm not nothing to the appropriateness either. But it does, I think, give you a framework to facilitate the conversations around that. And actually, if you're
Absolutely.
saying things and they're just going, no, it's like, well, you're not taking this in good faith anymore. Therefore, I'm not prepared to engage with you either because I don't believe you're doing this in good faith. So I think it empowers both parties in a particular way, or it's giving a level of leeway. If someone makes a mistake, you're able to go, well, hang on, I just want to let you know, this is kind of what we're doing. And so the example I give, for example, in my classroom for pronouns. I say, if someone's doing it to deliberately wind me up, they use he, him. Like if I correct someone, I go, all they, them, please, and they make the mistake again, and I go, all they, them. You know, if they've done it 10 times in one conversation, I'm like, I don't believe you're engaging in good faith. You're not even making the effort. Like, it's time to leave my classroom. And I think you could hold a kind of a similar scope here. Like, actually, you haven't engaged with my questions now repeatedly. You haven't engaged with things that require with any kind of level of explanation, despite giving you that space for it. This is my line now because I can't engage in good faith, and I don't believe that you are either. Goodbye.
Yeah,
Does that
I'm
make sense?
finding that really empowering as
Yeah.
well. Of course, I've got to remember in the back of my mind that often there's a lack of understanding about tech as well, and is what is happening. So we've got to bear that in mind too. And people may need support on that. But
But there's a
yeah,
difference between someone choosing not to but having the opportunity. I would argue is bad faith versus
yeah,
someone who might go, oh, like, you know, I really want to, and I'm so sorry I've messed up. And it gives you that kind of, it gives both parties enough slack while still not like kind of letting go of the leash, right?
yes,
Entirely. It's that kind of, I find it, you know, like one of those leads where you have like the extendable ones and you can press it and it goes and sucks back in. It's almost a little bit like that. It's like, I can let off enough as I want. No, actually, I want to come this back now. You know, it's very much that kind of vibe. And I think that's what I like about it. It's a level of free reign, right, for certain things to take place, but without fully relinquishing control. And I think that bit is the useful mix between it's the balance where you're not sacrificing your own mental health, emotional,
mm,
physical, whatever health in any single way, um, or just your own morals, even like whatever. It doesn't allow you to relinquish anything while still kind of giving people the opportunity to engage and for you to open up and engage, whilst being able to whenever you need to or want to go, no, I'm done, bye, and walk out.
yeah, very empowering, very empowering. And the good faith agreement is, I can see it's something that you use all the time. Do you see it as a tool that is so-called sort of fully packaged and finished, or do you see that it might develop in some way and change and morph into something else or add on to something else? What do you have any thoughts about it, or is it just what it is and you're just using it and it's working, it's fantastic?
So I think there's a couple of things there. By its nature, I think it's designed to be flexible, right? Um, I also would kind of be reluctant to kind of claim an ownership of it, as in this is what it is. Like, because first of all, I think that would be in bad faith. You know what I mean? Whilst it's nice that people go, "Oh my god, this person here came up with this idea and stuff," and kind of did it. The thing is, it's not my idea necessarily. I think I've just conceptualized a certain phrasing around it that is accessible or has people have at least understood in a clear way. I don't think the idea of taking things in good faith is inherently a new or novel idea, but I think the way it's implemented and clearly demarcated, I think is perhaps more unusual than not at the minute. I would love to see it morph into different things. As to what, I don't know, and that's okay. I think, as I said, different contexts will have different requirements and different frameworks. And there may be, for example, certain spaces where you can make those adaptations as they go. You can go, actually, in this space, this is a boundary we've all agreed. And if you enter this space, this is the boundary we've agreed. And you have to enter the space in that good faith that this is what we've agreed. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
I think, I guess, to call it a singular tool that does a singular thing, I think would risk reducing it to something not simplistic, but I would be dubious about doing that because what I wouldn't want to do is limit the way that different people can use it.
Mm.
Like I might view a particular, this is a clunky metaphor, but like I might view a hammer as being able to do one thing, but someone else might view the hammer as being able to do something else, and then someone else as something else. So as long as we're kind of engaging with it in that way, rather than going, this is a tool that can only do X, I'm very happy for that, and I would encourage this kind of fluidity and growth mindset from it. And if someone was to come to me and go, actually, you know what, like I think it would benefit from this change. Let's say a good faith approach would be listening to them. It doesn't necessarily mean that I'm immediately going to take it on, or it doesn't necessarily mean I even agree with them. but it does mean being able to go, this is an interesting kind of conversation that we've opened up, and I'm open to those conversations. If I go, no, actually, it's fine, bye, I'm kind of undermining my own kind of philosophy on it. So I think I have to be, first of all, but not just I have to be, I want to be. I'm very open, and without trying to like overstate it, I think by using it, there's a necessity to be open to change,
Yeah.
for those reasons.
And I'm thinking about it with its use within the arts and within the nest box. And the nest box is used with between individuals. Even if an individual is part of an organization, the nest box isn't completed on behalf of the organization, it's completed as an individual. So do you see the good faith agreement between individuals, or could you see it in somehow where an institution buys into it and works with it, where an institution buys into the idea of a good faith agreement and uses it from a really positive, active point of view? It's not lip service. They actually actively deliver this as you do. But as an organization rather than a single individual within that organization. Do you think it needs to be individual to individual, or could it be an organization? Do you think? Would that work?
So I'm going to challenge something you said
Did
there.
that make sense?
It did make sense. No, it made perfect sense. But I'm going to challenge something there, because you said, can it be the individual or an institution rather than and? And I'm kind of, I would lean away from this binary, it's this or that. I think there are adaptations that institutions could use. I think it could take, bear in mind as well, like, though I use it as though I say tool, I'm using that word tool. Actually, I think that's perhaps not the correct word now that I think about it in this way. I think I used the word earlier, it's more of a philosophy of teaching for me. And I think an institution can take that approach very easily and encourage people to do that. But I think it would, again, by necessity, require it requires a level of intermediacy between people, I think. For example, if it was a completely roboticized AI-based company that is functionally and entirely AI, like there's no single human, like it would be meaningless, you know? It is, at the end of the day, a philosophy that is relational. Whatever those relations are, it is a relational philosophy between groups of peoples or people or individuals or anything. It requires that framework, because it is about ultimately how we relate and converse and speak and learn from one another. I think a lot of institutions would benefit from this, actually, but I think A, they're scared, and I think B, there's a lot of the philosophy itself challenges a lot of hierarchies, because it removes an assumption of hierarchical knowledge and this idea that one only passes information one way in a transactional kind of agreement. In a university, for example, that transactional agreement falls down to the student pays money, they turn up to class, they are lectured at, and they have very controlled conversations around certain topics. And logistically and necessarily, there are certain spaces that require a level of guidance. For example, I can't talk about certain things, certain topics, without covering some basic things to make sure people understand that. And controlling it in that way can be really useful. With that said, I think institutions, I say universities, that's just because that's just academic, and that's the kind of an institution I'm thinking of right now. But I do think that it requires people to be comfortable with discomfort at times. A really good example would be that classroom example I gave earlier, when that person made that comment and everyone was like, whoa! Like, no one was comfortable at that particular moment in that class. Okay, no one was comfortable. But actually what it allowed us to do was control that discomfort and progress forward. Now, I think when we move to massive organizations, we're talking people who employ hundreds, if not thousands of people, even organizations that get up to millions, right? I think it would start to fall down necessarily because I think it requires certain, again, type of person to engage in a certain way. And I can see it, unfortunately, either being weaponized all the way through to utilized in bad faith, actually. That would be the way to put it. I think that would be a real shame. But
Yeah,
unfortunately,
absolutely.
it is unfortunately how I can kind of see it being, I can see it being used in a way to silence people. Ironically, as it's completely oppositely intended. Like
Yeah,
it's which I guess is kind of sad, I think. I think it definitely benefits more at an interpersonal level, and it benefits between certain groups of people other than others. But it's for that reason why when I'm controlling a space, such as a workshop or a space like that, I'm very clear. But again, I always say there are other spaces you can go to. If this isn't suited for you, that is fine. There is genuinely no hard feelings. Here are 3 other teachers you can go to for this course. But this is how I'm running this course. I said, like, you entering my space, as in my classroom, requires an agreement to that. And if you're not prepared to engage in good faith, then I'm not prepared to have that conversation. And I don't think that's bad faith. I think that's me respecting my own boundaries and stuff. But it does mean in equal parts, you might not have conversations in other ways. But I would say on the balance of it, it enables conversation more than it shuts it down. But I'd argue that that person was never willing to have a conversation if they're prepared to walk out there anyway. So you haven't lost anything that you would have gained, if that makes
yeah,
sense.
yeah. I mean, it strikes me that what you're saying is that the philosophy is probably best at grassroots level,
Yeah,
where things can really change and people can really deeply listen and honor the philosophy that it is. And the biggest change can come from grassroots level
I
because it
agree.
builds those real foundations.
I think you're really touching on something there. I can imagine it working in an institution, for example, and I'm not really sure to what size you might start losing it, where that is a philosophy that has been ingrained from the very beginning. I can see it working better then because I can see it becomes foundational to the culture of that space. I think in my mind, I think when you asked the question about institution, I'm thinking like how could it be implemented into existing institutions? And
Mm,
I think you would get very, very mixed results there.
yeah,
I reckon it could work in some, but it also requires the buy-in of pretty much everyone there being prepared to do that. Whereas if you can set it up at the beginning, the buy-in is already there, right?
yeah,
And
absolutely.
it's a buy-in in a mutually beneficial way. Like for example, laying out those conditions when you're having accessibility discussions,
Yeah,
rather than trying to. I'm not saying like retrospectively apply it. It allows you to kind of go, But also, I was going to say, even if you don't state it, I stand by it's a really good philosophy, at least for me, on how I choose to engage with people. Like, if I'm going, actually, I don't think I can engage in good faith anymore because it might be I'm pissed off. It might be I'm tired of this conversation going in circles. It could be myriad reasons, right?
mm,
I don't need a specific reason. But if I'm going, actually, am I engaging in good faith here? No, maybe I'm not anymore. I think it's time for me to step back. And that's not dismissive of like my care in a situation. That's not dismissive of my passion or interest in a particular situation. What it is reflective of is my capacity and my ability to engage in a productive way, and learn. Because if I can't engage in good faith, I might as well just be shouting into the void,
yeah,
and
yeah.
that isn't health. At least in my mind, that's not healthy. At least in that particular way, to continue to engage with someone in that way.
And that reflects on how I talk about accessibility and access needs. Is it's it's a meeting in the middle. It's not a I need this and you've got to supply it, or a polarized thing. It's a these are my access needs. Some are actually non-negotiable for me to be able to engage with this. Others, I understand, will clash with other people's access needs. So we need to find a balance in the middle where everybody can access something of equal value without physical, mental detriment. And I think sometimes that is lost, that it is a meeting in the middle.
Only sometimes.
Okay, I was being generous. It's often lost that there's a
Yes.
there's a meeting in the middle. Likewise, I also have a responsibility to myself that if those needs aren't being met, like the similar things that you've described, if those needs aren't being met and it's detrimental to myself, and after I've said a couple of times, actually, if we're meeting in good faith, these are my access requirements to be able to be in this space, it causes a lot of physical or mental detriment for me to be in that space, in that kind of environment. I have the responsibility in my meeting in the middle to step back. Now, an environment should be accessible and these things shouldn't be continuous and going on. But likewise, I shouldn't have to keep myself in that space and enjoy that space.
Exactly.
And they're my boundaries.
And yeah, and your boundaries on when something is shifted from good to bad faith might be different from mine,
Absolutely.
from someone else's. And I guess that's kind of what I like about the thing. It's flexible enough where someone can go, actually, I can't do this anymore. And like I said, I don't think, at least the way you described it there, I think is really nice actually, because you're obviously describing it in quite an empowering way, whilst being able to kind of claim ownership over the things that you need and require in a really useful way. But in equal parts, if someone is sitting there going, "No, we can't do that. No, 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 we can't."
That's not meeting in the middle.
Well, it was also, I'd argue, in bad faith.
Yeah, absolutely.
Parallels. And I'd say, like, you just go, well, okay then, goodbye. I don't need to entertain this anymore, because this isn't a conversation or a kind of a back and forth, and I don't mean that in a negative way necessarily, but or a back and forth which is beneficial for either party, because I'm pissed off, you're not doing anything, and we're just clashing. So it's like, okay, cool.
Yeah, right, it's not good for anybody.
So off we go. And I think, well, I mean, there's a reason it's called the good faith agreement and not the not bad faith agreement, because actually it doesn't necessarily have to be in bad faith, but it does have to be in good faith. You know what I mean? If it's not in good faith, even if it's just like, well, you're not even engaging in good faith, not necessarily bad, you're not even good. That's also a nice boundary where you can go, no, I'm good, thanks. Yeah. I'm done.
Yeah, yeah. It's quite common to come into that kind of environment, and it's very damaging. So it is important to step back. But it can be really frustrating, especially when you're a freelance person. I was going to say freelance artist, but freelance anything, because then income is lost or could be lost from that. So it's a little bit frustrating. So I've realized that really assessing the environment, the organization, the people that you're working with, and having maybe a nest box with a good faith ingredient. They could all be ingredients, couldn't they? A good faith agreement as part of it. So you're really instilling where you are at the foundation is really, really important.
Yeah, I agree. For me, at least, anyway, I'm always very transparent in what I do. And I say, I'm being transparent and I'm doing it in good faith. How people take that is up to them, you know what I mean? Like, but like I will kind of put that out. For the most part, I think people really respect that about me, or at least they say they do. Maybe they don't, but they say they do. Because I am unambiguous and clear in what I need and or want. There's no ambiguity in the sense of people don't have to wonder why I'm doing what I'm doing, but they can say they might be able to go, I don't get why they're doing that, but at least they can go, well, hang on, it's in good faith. And there's the opportunity, if you think it's not in good faith, to talk to me about that, and we have that conversation and move forward. Yeah, I think that's probably, yeah, the nuts and bolts of it, really. It's
Right.
it's a method of facilitation. It's a philosophy. It is adaptable. It's fluid. In my experience, it's been really productive, and I appreciate that it might not be for others in other ways, but that's kind of how I approach this. That's how I engage with this, and I guess that's my experience of it.
Thank you for that. We're drawing close to the end of our time together. So, what I ask everybody at the end of each of these podcasts is there a little bit of advice you've got, or a little takeaway for people to be able to utilize what you're talking about, in this case, the good faith agreement, going forward? Just something that they can pick up on and say, yeah, I can try that in my way.
Yeah, I think it's one of those things, I think, that can feel very awkward at first, because we, I mean we as in people, but I would say specifically British people, are notoriously polite, or we'd like to think we are, or we use a lot of euphemisms, and we don't like being as clear and transparent as perhaps that good faith agreement is putting things out on the table. I would say go for it. That's all I can say. Throw yourself into it, and be aware that this isn't the way to do it. If you want to make changes and adaptations, go with it. But be confident in it and believe in it. And if you don't, I would say don't do it. Which I hope people would believe in it. I mean, I want to say, like, I hope it's a good enough agreement where people go, yeah, actually, I want to try this. But it does require you to, I guess, really buy into it, and repeatedly and demonstrably show it. I begin every single class I do, every single class with it, to the point where, like, when I've forgotten to do it, people are like, are you okay? You know what I mean? Like people but like, it's so normalized in my classroom now that it's a given. And I think that speaks for itself. Like, people come to my class and do that. And I think, and however you want to engage with it, be that just on an individual level and in your own personal boundaries, great. And learning when to step back because you don't feel like something's in good faith anymore is also a hard skill to learn, but one I think this could help you kind of do and rationalize. And don't feel bad for it either. Don't feel bad for drawing your own boundaries and going, I no longer want to engage in this particular framework. Good. That's what it allows you to do. I don't know, I feel like I just maybe repeated myself, but I'm hoping that people are going, yeah, actually, you know what, I might be able to give this a go, and I hope they do. And, you know, if you have good stories about it, by all means, if you think of other things, please reach out to me. Genuinely welcome it. And, like, let's have a talk. I would love it to get better and better and better and better and spread and do all these other magical, fabulous things and enable people to learn and love and, again, all the good stuff.
Oh, that's brilliant. Thank you. Thank you, Nick. Thank you, Ibi. And I think my takeaway from it is I don't really need a they them post-it note in front of me, but maybe I would use a in good faith post-it note for a while to bring it into the forefront of my mind when I'm in certain situations. So that might be my takeaway. So
I did
thank
that
you.
with Queer as Fuck, just to say I had a set introduction that we did at the beginning of it, and it was in there. And because I was like, I'm going to forget, or I'm not going to do that, and I wanted to remind myself. It's brilliant. Do it. Do it. Do it.
I will. Thank you so much for talking to me today. It's been an absolute pleasure, as it always is, Nick. Or Ibi, or both.
That's why there's they them. There's two of them. I'm kidding. No, it's a delight to talk to you always. I love it when we just powwow and chat and the rest of it, and have a natter, be it big things, small things, and everything in between. So this has been wonderful. So thank you for inviting me, and thank you for having the conversation in good faith.
In good faith. This podcast sits within the Rewilding the Artist project, an innovative journey to equity and authentic self-expression, kindly supported by the Arts Council of Wales Lottery Fund. This podcast can be found on Spotify and YouTube. You can find Rewilding the Artist on Instagram and further resources on the website. All links can be found in the description. Thank you for listening and enjoy the journey.